Imagine an industry that produces over 2 million tons of beef every single year.
Right, which is just a staggering amount of food.
Yeah, it's massive. It feeds a vast global population, and it serves as the absolute backbone of a national economy.
Exactly. And naturally, you would assume this kind of operation relies on, vast herds of genetically optimized beef cattle.
Right. Animals bred specifically for the grill.
Yeah, purpose-bred animals.
But what if I told you that in this multi-billion-dollar meat engine, there was actually not a single cow raised specifically for beef?
I mean, it sounds like an impossible riddle.
It really does.
You have this massive output of red meat, yet the entire concept of a purpose-bred beef animal essentially doesn't even exist in the system.
It's wild to think about.
Mhm.
But welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you with us.
We really are.
Today, we're exploring this staggering contradiction, which is Pakistan's livestock sector.
Hmm?
And you sent us a fascinating stack of materials to explore this.
Yeah, a really great set of documents.
Specifically, we've got a comprehensive Wikipedia article detailing animal husbandry in Pakistan, and also a highly detailed industry report focused entirely on the country's beef industry.
Both of which are packed with some pretty surprising data.
Totally. So our mission today is to figure out how this massive economic engine actually functions on such an unoptimized traditional model.
And why it's currently poised on the edge of a major global breakthrough.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this.
To truly grasp the untapped potential hidden in these sources, we first need to look at the sheer monumental scale of the livestock footprint in Pakistan.
Because it is huge.
It is. We aren't talking about some niche agricultural subsector here. We are looking at a system that effectively sustains the entire country.
The numbers you shared with us paint an incredible picture. Let's put this into perspective for a second.
Yeah, the 2020 data, right.
Yeah, as of 2020, there were roughly 49.6 million cattle
Wow.
and 41.2 million buffaloes, 78.2 million goats, and 30.9 million sheep.
That is just, that's an ocean of animals.
Right. We are talking about over 200 million farm animals. That is roughly one livestock animal for every single human being living in the country.
Which fundamentally reshapes how we view their labor force,
How so?
Well, this isn't an industry dominated by automated corporate megafarms like you might see elsewhere. The data shows between 30 and 35 million people are directly engaged in livestock rearing.
Wait, 35 million people?
Yeah, 35 million. That is over 42% of Pakistan's entire total labor force.
Oh my gosh.
And it's primarily concentrated in the rural landscapes of Punjab and Sindh. Almost half the working population's livelihood is inextricably tied to these animals.
That's incredible. And all of that localized rural effort translates into a monumental amount of food.
Right, the output is huge.
The economic survey figures from around 2017 to 2018 show total meat production sitting at over 4.2 million tons.
Which is a massive yield.
Yeah, and when you break that down, beef completely outpaces mutton and poultry combined. It claims the lion's share at over 2.15 million tons.
Compared to, what, 717,000 tons of mutton?
Exactly. And about 1.39 million tons of poultry. So beef is clearly the undisputed king of the table.
No question about it.
But here is the massive pivot we hinted at earlier. Pakistan produces all of that beef without dedicating a single breed to meat production.
And this is where the global comparison becomes really vital to understand.
Yeah, right.
In the United States, for instance, a consumer eats about double what a consumer in Pakistan eats.
Because the sources peg Pakistan's consumption at roughly 19 kilograms per capita, right?
Yeah, exactly, 19 kilograms. And to meet that kind of high demand in developed markets, they rely heavily on genetic specialization.
Meaning they breed animals just for meat.
Right. Breeds like Angus or Hereford, they're engineered over generations for one specific biological goal, which is converting feed into high-quality muscle tissue.
But the sources reveal a completely different reality in Pakistan. The local breeds animals like the red Sindhi and Sahiwal cows.
Right, and the Neeli Ravi and Kungi buffaloes.
Yeah, those guys. They are the ultimate utility players. They are used for milk and dairy production first.
Or they serve as vital draft animals.
Right, providing the raw pulling power for transport alongside camels and donkeys. It's honestly like using a heavy, reliable commuter bike every single day for 10 years and then suddenly expecting it to win the Tour de France.
That's a great way to put it.
The physiology is just built for a completely different job. The animals only enter the meat market at the very end of their lives, after they are retired or culled.
What's fascinating here is how this dual-purpose life cycle fundamentally alters the molecular biology of the meat.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, when an animal spends a decade pulling a cart or producing milk, its physical structure adapts to survive that labor.
Makes sense.
The connective tissue surrounding the muscles becomes incredibly dense and tough. The animal isn't spending its life just resting and building tender, marbled muscle for a high-end steakhouse.
Right, it's burning calories for daily survival.
Exactly. And the industry report gives us a really clear nutritional breakdown of what that looks like on a cellular level.
Yeah, those numbers are super interesting.
When you look at a 100-gram serving of purely lean beef, it's mostly water, about 75% water actually, and 22.3% protein.
Okay.
But when you look at the older end-of-life carcass as a whole, that water content drops to around 54.7%. The protein drops, and the fat content spikes all the way up to 28%.
Wow, that is a huge shift in the makeup of the meat.
It really is, and that structural difference dictates everything about how the meat can actually be used commercially.
Because high-quality processed meat products require a highly specific, easily manipulated balance of muscle meat and animal fat.
Precisely.
Hmm.
When your raw material is an exhausted end-of-life dairy cow with hardened connective tissue, achieving that ideal commercial texture becomes an uphill battle.
Which introduces a fairly dark reality about this whole second life model.
Yeah, definitely it does.
If these animals aren't purpose-bred and they only enter the food supply when they are no longer useful,
Yeah.
we have to look at the physical condition they're in when they finally reach the butcher.
And it's often not good.
No. The sources clearly outline a severe infrastructural and health crisis plaguing the current setup.
The materials are very transparent about the risks here.
Yeah.
These cold, non-productive, large animals are often sent to slaughter simply because they are at the end of their rope.
Right.
And sometimes farmers send chronically diseased animals to the butcher because veterinary treatment has just become way too expensive to maintain.
That is a massive red flag for any food system.
It's a huge issue. The report explicitly acknowledges this, noting that quality compromised meat regularly enters the domestic consumption cycle.
Which is terrifying.
It directly elevates the risk of zoonotic diseases, illnesses that can jump the biological barrier from animals to humans.
And in a highly centralized system, this is exactly where regulators would step in.
Right, ideally.
But the reality on the ground in Pakistan is vastly different. The word unregulated almost feels too light.
Yeah, it's heavily decentralized.
One statistic from the report is particularly jarring. It says 80% of all slaughtering in the country is done completely outside of official slaughterhouses.
80%, it's almost hard to wrap your head around.
It is. 80% of this multi-million-ton industry is essentially off the grid. It's operated mostly by local butchers selling fresh meat in open-air markets.
And the official infrastructure is incredibly sparse. We are looking at a system where only about 11 private sector slaughterhouses hold official registration from the Animal Quarantine Department.
Only 11 in the whole country.
Yeah, just 11. That leaves a stark, dangerous void where veterinary supervision should be.
Wait, hold on, I have to stop you there.
Sure, go ahead.
If 80% of the meat is processed off the grid, and we know there is a tangible risk of getting tough, older, or even diseased meat, why are consumers still buying it?
That is the million-dollar question.
More importantly, why hasn't the free market organically demanded better quality by now? You would think farmers would want to raise better beef to make more money.
This raises an important question, and it really strikes at the very heart of why this industry is trapped in a cycle of stagnation.
Okay, why is that?
The reason the free market hasn't corrected this is because the market isn't entirely free. The district authorities strictly fix the retail price for beef and mutton at the consumer level.
Wait, really? So the government caps the price of meat at the butcher shop?
Yes, exactly. The pricing policy is designed entirely to protect the consumer's wallet.
Okay, I mean, that sounds good for the buyer.
It does on paper, but in doing so, it creates a fatal economic flaw. There is absolutely no special price allowance given for higher quality meat.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. A farmer gets paid the exact same rate for an exhausted, tough, 10-year-old draft cow as they would for a prime, healthy, well-fed steer.
Wow. That completely destroys any incentive to improve.
Totally.
If I'm a farmer, why would I spend my limited capital on premium feed or modern veterinary care or better breeding practices if my financial return is artificially capped?
You wouldn't. It makes no financial sense. And that lack of incentive cascades downward, creating what the report calls a low input and low output system.
Because the farmers aren't investing in premium care, the entire supply chain remains primitive.
Right. And predatory middlemen step into this decentralized chaos, extracting profits before they ever reach the rural producer.
And the physical infrastructure just never develops. The sources talk about heavy transportation losses because there is literally no specialized logistics network to move these animals safely from the rural villages to the urban centers.
Plus, the lack of modern meat technology leads to staggering waste.
Waste of what exactly?
Well, in a modernized commercial slaughterhouse, every single part of the animal is monetized. The blood, the bone, the hides, the internal
Right,
organs.
nothing goes to waste.
But here, because processing happens largely in decentralized local butcher setups, a massive portion of those valuable byproducts is simply discarded.
It sounds incredibly bleak. I mean, you have 35 million people tied to an industry that actively punishes them for trying to improve.
It's a tough situation.
Dealing with aging animals and almost non-existent infrastructure. But despite these immense structural roadblocks, the materials show a fascinating shift happening.
Yes, things are changing.
Consumer behavior within Pakistan is rapidly evolving, and that domestic pressure is forcing the industry to finally look outward.
The domestic landscape is absolutely transforming. Urbanization is pulling people away from rural villages and into fast-paced city environments.
Right.
And alongside rising income levels, there is a much higher degree of nutritional awareness.
So people's daily routines are changing, which changes how they eat.
Exactly. The traditional model relied on families going to the local butcher to buy fresh meat every single day.
Which takes time.
Right. But an urban professional lifestyle demands convenience. Consumers are increasingly seeking out frozen meat, ready-to-eat meals, and highly processed meat products.
And if you recall our earlier discussion about cellular structure,
Yeah.
creating those processed products requires a specific, reliable ratio of fat to lean meat.
Which you simply cannot extract from a random assortment of end-of-life dairy cows.
Exactly. Add in the massive spikes in volume demand during festive seasons, and the current system is just stretching to its breaking point.
It's under so much pressure.
But the wild part is, the raw potential to meet this new demand is literally grazing in the fields right now.
Yeah, the genetic raw material totally exists.
The industry report points specifically to the Thari cow breed, which is native to the region and naturally prone to rapid weight gain.
Which makes the Thari breed a prime, untapped candidate. If the agricultural sector decided to develop a dedicated commercial beef program, they wouldn't even have to import foreign genetics.
Right, they have a local breed ready to be optimized.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
The pressure isn't just coming from domestic urban centers. The global opportunity sitting just across the border is astronomical.
That's huge.
The report breaks down the global halal food trade, estimating its total value will cross $3 trillion.
That's trillion with a T?
Yeah. And the halal meat sector alone contributes about $600 billion to that pie.
And because Pakistan is a Muslim state, its entire baseline for animal slaughter naturally aligns with halal provisions.
Right.
The processing methods don't need to be adapted or retrofitted for export. Halal is just the default.
Meaning, the meat produced there is universally acceptable to both Muslim and non-Muslim markets globally.
It is an incredible built-in advantage that most countries spend billions trying to replicate.
Yet, currently, according to the data, Pakistan's total meat exports account for less than 0.6% of its production.
Not even 1%.
Not even 1%. Pakistan is effectively sitting on the sidelines of a $600 billion global gold rush simply because it lacks the modern shovels to dig it up.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, transitioning from a localized off-the-grid low-input system into an international export powerhouse requires a monumental structural overhaul.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy.
You cannot capture a slice of a $600 billion international market using local butchers and fixed-price draft cows.
So how does a nation actually build those modern shovels?
Well, the sources outline that the government is fully aware of the stakes. They are currently working with the Asian Development Bank on various development projects aimed at improving livestock efficiency.
Okay, that's a start.
But moving the needle requires major private investment. They need to build an export-oriented supply chain almost entirely from scratch.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've navigated the massive scale of Pakistan's agricultural workforce, the biological contradictions of eating draft animals, the public health risks of off-the-grid processing.
And of course, the jaw-dropping potential of the global halal market.
Right. When you synthesize all of this information, Pakistan's beef industry is the ultimate sleeping giant.
And the industry report actually provides a very specific tactical blueprint for how to wake that giant up.
What does that blueprint look like?
To transform this raw potential into export-grade value, they need to implement severe modernization. The checklist is pretty daunting.
Break it down for us.
First, the report calls for establishing a minimum of 10 massive modern abattoirs, state-of-the-art slaughterhouses,
Right.
strategically located in the 10 major cities, and supplemented by mini slaughterhouses to capture and centralize all that rural output.
Okay. They also need to build environmentally controlled meat markets to maintain the cold chain, right? Ensuring the meat doesn't spoil in transit.
Exactly. Furthermore, adding dedicated leather tanning units would finally capture the lost economic value of the hides and byproducts we talked about earlier.
But the most critical piece of the puzzle, the absolute prerequisite for entering the global market, is the establishment of completely disease-free zones.
Yes, this is crucial.
By setting up these heavily monitored, quarantined agricultural areas, the industry isn't just cleaning up farms. They are essentially creating an internationally recognized passport for this meat.
Right, because without that specific geographic health certification, foreign countries simply will not legally allow the imports.
No matter how perfectly the meat is processed.
Exactly. It is a sweeping vision of modernization. It requires taking an industry that currently supports 35 million traditional, decentralized livelihoods and converting it into a streamlined, highly regulated commercial machine.
Which brings up a really fascinating, almost invisible tension to end on.
Oh, definitely.
Throughout this deep dive, we've focused on the economic and structural necessity of modernizing this massive industry. But there is a small, easily overlooked detail in the Wikipedia text that paints a vivid picture of just how deeply woven these living animals are into the daily survival of rural families.
It's the detail regarding the daily byproducts of the animals while they are still alive on the farm.
Right. The text specifically notes that the dung excreted by these dual-purpose cattle is an absolutely vital resource.
Yeah, it's not just waste.
In rural areas, that manure is gathered, dried, and used to supply daily cooking fuel,
Wow.
as well as serving as the primary soil fertilizer for their crops. It is the literal energy backbone of the village ecosystem.
Which leaves us with a highly provocative consequence to consider.
What's that?
If Pakistan successfully executes this modern blueprint, if they manage to shift away from millions of individual village farmers raising their own dual-purpose cows and instead centralize everything into massive, purpose-bred commercial beef farms,
I see where you're going with this.
what happens to those rural families?
Exactly. If you extract those millions of individual animals from the local village ecosystem to create an efficient, centralized meat machine, what happens to the people who rely on that daily manure to cook their food and fertilize their crops?
It is the ultimate paradox of progress. In the pursuit of capturing a $600 billion global meat trade, could modernizing the beef industry accidentally pull the rug out from under the rural energy balance?
It is a complex web,
Yeah.
and pulling on one thread, even with the explicit goal of improving the whole system, inevitably shifts the ground beneath someone else's feet.
It really does.
We want to thank you for joining us on this custom deep dive. We hope it gave you a new lens on how macroeconomics, biological realities, and traditional livelihoods constantly collide.
Keep questioning the systems around you.
And keep exploring those unexpected connections. We will catch you on the next deep dive.